Hello, and welcome to the Unhinged Binge, a podcast wherein I, the unhinged, overcaffeinated, underslept human being that I am, Lego, am doing a deep dive into 1980s horror. This episode specifically, I'm looking at the year 1981, and we are going to explore horror. Yes, that's right. I'm going to discuss the 40 plus 1981 films that I have seen from this year, just giving you a general bits of information, all taken from Letterboxd. If some of these movies probably have other release dates associated with them, like I said, I'm just going based on what Letterboxd said, so I keep it simple, keep it neat, keep it clean, keep it organized. Just helpful that way. I won't be spoiling anything unless I give you a whole big heads up beforehand. All right. So I want to start with two movies that aren't really horror movies, but are horror adjacent, just to give them quick shout outs. The first being Roar, Roar, the lion movie, infamous for being really crazy, terrible movie. It was directed by, I believe, by Noel Marshall, and it has his wife at the time, Tippi Hedren, her daughter, Melanie Griffin, and so many on-set injuries because they were filming with all these real-life big cats that are kind of dangerous and scary. It's not really a horror movie, but it's one of those movies if you know about the making of it, it's just so intense to watch that it's kind of horror adjacent. The other one being Shock Treatment, which is the very underappreciated Rocky Horror Picture sequel. I like it. I don't know if it's generally considered well liked or not, but I enjoy it and definitely would recommend it. It's a lot more zany. I know I'm saying it's more zany than the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but it is. It's more zany. Okay, so now on to actual films from 1981. I took a lot of recommendations from like the highest and lowest rated films on Letterboxd, any sequels that I needed to watch. I took a lot from a book called The Teen Slasher. No, what is it called? I think it's the Teen Slasher movie book. And I'll have the name of the book below. I didn't write it down. And then also from the documentary In Search of Darkness. Well, there's the 3 volumes. It's a long list. All right. So we'll start with what is currently the highest rated horror film on Letterboxd from 1981, and that is the film Possession, directed by Andrzej Zulawski. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. It's starring Isabel Anjani and Sam Neill. The subgenre, I classify it as divorce horror. The tagline reads, "Inhuman ecstasy fulfilled." And I personally think this is an absolute masterpiece of performance. The lighting and setting is all so well done. The characters are unhinged, absolutely unhinged. It fits this podcast. I love this movie. It goes more into like the art house abstract metaphor. I can see in modern times this would be like an A24 movie for sure. I deeply adore this film. It's it's nonsense, but it's artful nonsense, and it's definitely horror. Monster. If you know the movie, you probably know about the monstrous octopus sex. That sounds so weird, but it's very difficult to explain. I would recommend anyone see it once. I know a lot of people don't like it. Totally get it, but I think if you're a fan of A24 films and the kind of stuff that they put out, then I would say that this movie's probably right up your alley. Moving on to the lowest rated movie on Letterboxd from 1981 is called Zombie Lake. It is directed by Jean Rollin and Juliana de la Serena. The subgenre is French zombie film. So, we're not quite at French extremity yet, but I think this is kind of the exploitation build to it. We have so many Italian zombie films that are just gratuitous and awful, and this one's somehow worse than those. The tagline reads, "God help us if they rise again." Yeah, it's just nasty and gross and not well done. And I guess that's why it's the lowest movie on the list. It's hard to find, but if you can find it and you like a lot of those like Italian zombie cannibal movies, I would definitely recommend it if that's the type of thing you like to watch. And then I would say one of the most influential horror movies from 1981, and one of the most important horror movies from 1981 is, of course, going to be The Evil Dead, directed and written by Sam Raimi. We all know who he is. Starring Bruce Campbell and a bunch of, I called them red shirts. The subgenre, I don't know. What would you call it? I said ghost demons in the haunted woods. The tagline reads, "The ultimate experience in grueling terror." It's a low budget, essentially almost a student-made film. It took them quite a few years to make it. Directed by, I mean, these guys are horror fans who were really dedicated to the craft and to making this film, and you have to appreciate that. Now, is the acting spectacular? No. Is the story great? I think, yeah, I think it's a great story. It's kind of early on in the if you go into the woods, something bad's gonna happen to you. That there's, I mean, so populated in 80s horror. But up until, I would say, up until maybe the late 70s, that really wasn't very common in the horror genre. I don't know why. Camping is just rife with terror. Perfect place for a horror movie, but it wasn't until the 80s where that became very, very common. I mean, it's so creative, it's so grotesque. I mean, hell yeah, baby. It started its own subgenre of ripoffs. Like, absolutely great film. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to some of our big sequels. I mean, it's the 80s, so we have to talk slasher sequels. 81 produced quite a few, but two really important ones because they're the sequel to the two franchises that kind of started the slasher craze, which is Halloween 2 and Friday the 13th Part 2, respectively. And I think that these two are gonna set the bar for what the slasher sequel is. So, let's see what they do. Halloween 2 is directed by Rick Rosenthal, who would later go on to direct Halloween Resurrection. It's written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill still, so they're both still involved with the franchise. The cinematography is by Dean Cundey again, who is, of course, so, so talented. It's got return of Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance, and with the addition of Lance Guest and Dick Warlock playing Michael Myers. I don't think that's important, but I love the name Dick Warlock, so there that is. This subgenre, I call it slasher sequel. Let's make them related this time edition. The tagline reads, "The nightmare isn't over." Horror movies in the 80s often end with the final girl either going to the hospital or more likely waking up in the hospital in the final moments, or worse, in a psychiatric ward, and was all just a dream. I blame Tommy for that one from St. Elsewhere. I mean, he's not to blame, but I blame him regardless because I can. This is kind of one of our first slasher sequels, right? So it makes sense logically for this film to pick up with our final girl, Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode, to be in the hospital. I think this is the most sense any of these slasher sequels are gonna make. And it's only 1981. Ooh, it's gonna get rough. So Friday the 13th Part 2 was directed by Steve Miner, who had produced the first one, and I think he also directs the third one. He directed Halloween H2O. He's involved in a lot of the House movies, like House 2, The Second Story, so on and so forth. That franchise is really very strange, especially if you go into the Italian versions of those films. Nonsense. Maybe I'll do an episode on that because I really love those movies. I think he also directed like Placid, Big Bully, Forever Young with Jamie Lee Curtis and Mel Gibson. Yeah, Elijah Wood. I don't know. So the subgenre, I'm going to say this is one of those, it's just a remake of the first movie, but with a bigger budget and tighter script. The tagline reads, "The body count continues," because in Friday the 13th, that's kind of what matters, was the body count, not so much the story. So why not just reuse the story? I mean, you've seen this movie. You've seen the first one, you've seen the second one, but it does, if you're in 1981, it really doesn't make sense that Jason is the killer in 2. However, if you're me and you grew up watching these films in the 2000s, then you've already had and always have had Jason as the killer. So you just kind of assume he's there and alive, even though it is dumb. I have so many follow-up questions. He's just been living in the woods. His mom never found him. It doesn't make any damn sense. I'm with Tom Slovenia. I'm not coming back to do this. It's dumb. I'm gonna go do the burning, which we'll talk about a little later. But I love the establishment of him as essentially an urban legend, like a literal campfire story that works perfectly for the location, being at a camp. And I like that he's wearing this like burlap sack as kind of it's not in homage to the town that dreaded sundown, but it's the exact same burlap sack. Come on now. I like Friday the 13th Part 2. I mean, I get why some people don't, but I think it's one of the good ones. And then our other one is probably not well talked about. It's also a Sam Neill, directed by Graham Baker. It's Omen 3, The Final Conflict. The tagline reads, "The power of evil is no longer in the hands of a child." That's right, because we have adult Sam Neill as Damien Thorne. I labeled the subgenre as satanic manic. So Sam Neill, of course, is delivering in his role the adult version of Damien Thorne. I just wish that the script hadn't chose him to make him so blindsided with fear that his actions become really dumb. It's kind of like a comic book. It's not even a comic book because at least the comic book villains are like smart because they're almost always doctors. What is it with comic villains being doctors? Why are we so suspicious of educated people? That's neither here nor there. Anyway, yeah, his actions become really dumb and ridiculous. I just wish that he'd been smarter. And it's weird that a horror movie ends with Jesus being reborn and winning against the Antichrist. I mean, it's a horror movie where our main character has pretty much been Damien, which the second movie is so good. So you think that we would let him win. But no, Jesus wins. I guess go Jesus. Ugh. Moving on. Okay, so we have some really important horror directors made some movies this year. So of course I had to see where are our big horror directors at in their careers, right? Sorry, I had to take a drink of tea. So Wes Craven in 1981 directed Deadly Blessing. The composer for this movie is James Horn, and you might know him. He did little films like Titanic, Aviator, Aliens, Jumanji, Casper, The Land Before Time. You ever stopped to listen to the Land Before Time soundtrack? It's so good. Willow, he did Willow. I love the Willow soundtrack. Anyway, so the soundtrack is obviously very good in this film. It's starring Sharon Stone, Michael Berryman, a bunch of other people. The subgenre I'm going to label as like religious horror, also transphobic weird nonsense. The tagline reads, "Pray you're not blessed." I don't love this movie. It does end up being transphobic in the end, where we reveal the killer is not just a killer and not just insane, but also I assume there's supposed to be one of those situations where the mother raised their child who was assigned male at birth as a girl, and that made them, unhinged, and they started murdering people. I don't like that. The film itself isn't great because it positions this like, listen, like, and they're not, I can't remember the religion they are. It is a real religion that exists, but they're very similar to Amish people, and it positions them as essentially being the good guys and being targeted by this killer, as well as these women who live next door to them. Like, nothing against the religion, but let's be clear, their religion is really misogynist, and I don't think there's been any case of anyone in these religions like murdering people, but it's a horror movie, guys. Like, we can say different things, you know what I mean? Like, we can make commentary. I'm just gonna move on. Scanners by David Cronenberg. The makeup was by Dick Smith and Chris Wallace, as well as many others. The composer was Howard Shore. Howard Shore, guys. The dude did The Lord of the Rings. Oh my God, the music in these movies is great. Scanner stars Michael Ironside, a bunch of other people, but Michael Ironside is the one who matters. The tagline reads 10 seconds, the pain begins. 15 seconds, you can't breathe. 20 seconds, you explode. Okay, I'm not the biggest Cronenberg fan. I know I should give back my horror movie fan card, but I'm just not a Cronenberg fan. I legitimately could not tell you what Scanners is about. I can't tell you anything that happens in that movie except for the head explosion. Because we've all seen the head explosion. It's a great head explosion. One of the best. It is phenomenal. But I have no idea about the rest of the movie because it's so boring. I'm so sorry. Just not my thing. Then Toby Hooper directed The Funhouse. The makeup was by Rick Baker, quite a few others. The subgenre, I would call this a disappointments room movie. A tagline reads, pay to get in, pray to get out. I wish it takes place at a carnival. That's why it's called Funhouse. I wish it had been a modern adaptation of Todd Browning's Freaks, because it had the potential to do that. But it ends up being just like another deformed, othered, carnies are evil and they're going to kill a group of young people, and it's very ableist, status quo BS, and I just don't like it. It's horror. It's horror, guys. We can make the people who are different be the heroes in horror. That's what's great about horror. It doesn't have to be the status quo. It can be different. It can be more honest. It can be more gritty. It can tell hard truths. It's horror. Anyway, I'm disappointed in Hooper and Craven and Cronenberg this year. Hopefully, the coming years will be better. Moving on to movies I like a lot more. Because, guys, it's time to talk about werewolves. 1981, we're fully into the slasher golden era. And the 80s is so well known for its ridiculous number of slasher sequels. I've already mentioned 2, Halloween 2 and Friday the 13th 2. But horror sequels are not themselves new, not by a long shot. They go back to the Universal Monster days of the 30s and 40s with their sequels just as numerous and just as convoluted. And it's interesting that when the slasher subgenre is on the rise, 1981 brought us like 4 werewolf movies as a throwback to those 40s monster movies. So let's see what updated versions of these retro classics are gonna do. First, I have to talk about American Werewolf in London because it's my favorite of the 4, directed by John Landis. Makeup by Rick Baker, famously. I think he won the first ever Academy Award, not only his, but the inaugural Academy Award for makeup effects for what he did in the werewolf transformation, and totally deserved. It's starring David Naughton, Griffin Dunne. There's a cameo by Frank Oz, which I don't know why I found important, but I did, because every time I see it, I forget he's in it till he's there because he's so unimportant. And I'm like, wait a minute, isn't that Miss Piggy? The subgenre, horror comedy werewolf movie with rotting ghost buddy. Tagline reads, beware the moon. I adore this film. It is still that tragic story about an innocent man who's cursed and suffering subsequently from that curse. There's the added bonus this film brings that I really love that we don't talk enough about in Griffin Dunne's character as the progressively rotting friend who is kind of one of his victims, who's urging him to unalive himself because if he continues to be a werewolf, the people that he kills while a werewolf can't pass on. They're stuck in this like limbo with each other, and also he's going to kill more people, which is, you know, not a good thing. So they're trying to stop this evil. I do think the romance is not necessary, but this is one of the perfect and best examples of a horror comedy where it doesn't go just so comedy that it might as well just be a comedy, or so horror that the comedy just seems weird and out of place. It really balances both the humor and the scales very effectively, and it works really, really well in this rare, like, perfect example of that combination. Next up, we have Hey, Joe Dante directed The Howling, based on a novel by Gary Brandner from 1997. I'm sorry, 1977 rather. Be weird if it was from 1997. The makeup is Rob Bottin, who had some help from Rick Baker. He was his protege. He's in his very, very early 20s when he does this. And he'll go on to do really great things in a few years with The Thing, the John Carpenter movie, The Thing, not just like an abstract thing. It's starring Dee Wallace, John Carradine. Of course, it's Joe Dante movie, so Rick Baker makes an appearance. I'm calling the subgenre Sexy Werewolf Pack. The tagline reads, "Imagine your worst fear a reality." Now, this is one of the earliest examples I can think of where we have a werewolf pack. The previous year of 1980 had a Hammer Films TV movie called Children of the Full Moon that has a werewolf pack. It's a family, actually. He has a litter of werewolf children. But this movie is the first one I could think of where there's like a pack of werewolves, which is odd given how easy the werewolf underline lends itself to the community aspect. Yet it's not really until The Howling that we get that. We almost always get these very depressed lone wolves, if you will. I don't love The Howling. I think every time I watch it, I like it more. So maybe if I give it another watch, I'll really start to enjoy it. But I just generally find its execution kind of boring and lackluster, especially when compared to just the perfect hit upon hit upon hit that is An American Werewolf in London. Oh, American Werewolf in London has the addition of just the perfect soundtrack. Poor The Howling. So, okay, I'm going to talk about Full Moon High next, and it's directed by Larry Cohen, who does so many horror movies. His best and most notable is probably The Stuff, but he also did Q, The Winged Serpent, It's Alive, Special Effects, Return to Salem's Lot. He's done a bunch of movies. It's starring Adam Arkin, his father Alan Arkin, a bunch of other people. Subgenre, I'm calling it a parody of 50s werewolf movies, or at least it tries to be. Full Moon High is just kind of a funny, silly, goofy little film. The tagline reads, "He's today teenage werewolf. Only the rules have changed." It's a total horror comedy, definitely parody. I feel like, oh man, I feel like Mel Brooks maybe would have done it a little better, but it's kind of in that vein, if you will. Oh, sorry, I had to get another sip of the tea. And lastly, we have Wolfen, directed by Michael Wadley. The composer, again, is James Horner, who I talked a little bit about before. Man, I freaking love James Horner. The Titanic soundtrack is something I could listen to endlessly. The subgenre, I don't know. Gritty New York City slasher, but it's a werewolf, but it's also not a werewolf. It's wolf spirits protecting the environment. And we have a kind of schlubby, New York City cop trying to solve the crimes. The tagline reads, "They can hear a cloud pass overhead, the rhythm of your blood. They can track you by yesterday's shadow. They can tear the scream from your throat." It's a good movie, hard to find. I mean, when comparing it to An American Werewolf in London or even The Howling, I would say I get why it's not the most well-known of these, which is unfortunate because it is a good movie, and I do like what it ultimately kind of says about, man v nature. And yeah, go nature. All right, so we have a couple other parody films from 1981 beyond Full Moon High. We have Saturday the 14th, directed by Howard R. Cohen, starring Richard Benjamin, Paula Prentice, Jeffrey Tambor, a whole bunch of others. I'm going to call the subgenre monster movie parody. The tagline reads, "Just when you thought it was safe to look at the calendar again." I think it's funny that this parody of monster movies is really forgettable, and it's odd that the title is a riff on slashers when it's actually a throwback to monster movies of the 30s and 40s, clearly being a riff on like Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Wolfman, all that stuff. It's a family in a haunted house, but a house that's being terrorized by monsters. I find it, yeah, like I said, forgettable. It's fine. I'd recommend it, but it's definitely not the best. Then we have Student Bodies, written and directed by Mickey Rose, starring Kristen Ritter and a bunch of others. It's a slasher parody. Tagline reads, "At last, the world's first horror comedy movie." It's I think it's so funny. It's so dumb. It's very over the top. Definitely has Mel Brooks vibes, or like it's like if Saturday Night Live did a slasher parody. It's exactly that. It definitely reads like a Saturday Night Live parody. I love it. I think it's super fun. Definitely recommend it. All right, so now we can talk about camp horror. We've already talked about The Evil Dead and Friday the 13th, and it was popular to make the woods scary. All right, so The Burning, directed by Tony Malum. I think I should note that it was originally a 5-page treatment by Harvey Weinstein. I don't think he produced it, but he didn't write all of it. But it's one of those movies that when you're watching it, I feel like when you know that, certain things stand out and not in a good way. But this is the movie that Tom Savini didn't do or did instead of Friday the 13th, Part 2. And unfortunately, The Burning came out, I believe, the week after Friday the 13th, Part 2. So that's unfortunate. The tagline reads, "A legend of terror isn't a campfire story anymore." And note that campfire story. So this movie is about the killer is this guy Cropsey, who is based on a real urban legend in Staten Island, right? I think this is a pretty good camp horror movie. I labeled the subgenre as revenge horror. If I think this movie kind of bridges the gap between like Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street in a weird way. It does have a young Jason Alexander and a whole bunch of other people you'll probably recognize being in their earliest roles. It's a little off-putting almost. Yeah, it's a good movie. I know a lot of people like The Burning a lot more than a lot of the films in the Friday the 13th franchise, but I'm gonna be honest, I like Friday the 13th so much more. We get Mad Men by Joe Giovanni. I call the subgenre Evil Hillbilly in the Woods. The tagline reads, "They thought they were alone." So this movie is also inspired by the Cropsey urban legend, just like The Burning is, except this movie has kind of a fun folksy rather campfire song called Mad Man Mars. Mad Man Mars is the killer. He goes around making this I swear it's the same sound effect from Suburban Sasquatch. So just over and over. It's very annoying. The movie is not good. The characters and story are forgettable. But that folksy song, Mad Man Mars, is real fun. It's a delight. That's what I remember from the movie. When it comes to, Friday the 13th to The Burning or Madman, I think I would rank them personally. I like Friday the 13th over The Burning, but I know most people like The Burning over the Friday the 13th. And then in a way, way, way further down, I'd go Madman. Then we get Don't Go Into the Woods, directed by James Bryan, subgenre. I really think the title explains the subgenre, actually. The tagline reads, "Everyone has nightmares about the ugliest way to die." Audio, editing, characters, in frame, nah. Focus, who? Score, plot, story, we don't know what any of those things are. What we do know is we got one of them movie picture cameras and some films. This movie has so many repeat lines, terrible ADR, too many fake outs. They have that Hammer-esque, really bright red blood, which I actually really like, but I'm assuming because it was cheap and they couldn't do a good blood effect. I don't know what the dude with the wheelchair in the wheelchair was. Woof. This movie was not fun. It was just very boring, very poorly made. I think it's kind of harder to find maybe, and there's not like a good, I don't know if there's a good restoration. I certainly couldn't find one. Yeah, I would recommend Madman over Don't Go in the Woods, and I would definitely recommend The Burning over both of them. All right, moving on to holiday horror. Sorry, I have to take another drink. Okay, so yeah, holiday horror. 1981 has a lot to offer in holiday horror. Of course, I've already mentioned, Halloween 2, Friday the 13th Part 2. Is Saturday the 14th count? I'm going to count it. Okay, so then we have a lot of birthday movies. Bloody Birthday, directed by Ed Hunt, who also directed The Brain. I love The Brain. Starring Elizabeth Hoy, who's in Hospital Massacre. I'll talk about that later. The subgenre, I would say evil kids. Is that a subgenre? I'm going to call it a subgenre. The tagline reads, "The nightmare begins with the kids next door." So this movie is like one of those movies where there's a comet passing over and something bad happens, and the bad thing being these 3 children are born, and they're the worst. I love a movie with child killers. It's hilarious. I think it's perfectly fun movie. Not necessarily anything to write home about, but would recommend watching. Happy Birthday to Me, directed by J. Lee Thompson, who also did Cape Fear, the original. And a few of the Planet of the Apes sequels, I think Conquers Planet of the Apes and Beneath Planet of the Apes. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. The subgenre is overly convoluted slasher set on a birthday. The tagline reads, 6 of the most bizarre murders you will ever see. I think the poster is really memorable of someone being like, this guy is having like a shish kebab going into his mouth, like getting like killed by one. It's such a memorable poster for such a forgettable film. It's like surprisingly boring, and the end kind of didn't really make sense. I think they decided to do a twist ending kind of on the spot, and so it just kind of doesn't really track with the rest of the movie. I felt, yeah. I wouldn't say don't watch it, but I would say don't try to don't try to figure out the ending because you're not going to. It's simply there's no possible way you would figure that out. Then we get to Madhouse, directed by Ovidio G. Acidantis. Did not say that right. He also did Beyond the Door. The subgenre, I'm going to call it Italian slasher set on a birthday. Tagline reads, "Many people visit, no one ever leaves." And to me, this movie is very similar to Happy Birthday to Me, and also another film that came out a few years later called Sweet 16. They're really oddly similar. It's a video nasty. I think it really deserved to be in my humble gore loving opinion. I'm gonna spare you the trip to doesthedogdie.com. I'm gonna spoil this movie, so if you don't want spoilers, maybe fast forward like 30 seconds. This movie has a killer who uses a Rottweiler to kill for them. You can definitely tell like there's a Rottweiler puppet they use when they want the dog to be vicious. I don't like movies that make Rottweilers evil. Rottweilers are really very sweet dogs, and they're very mistreated because of this. Um, and yeah, so justice for Rotties, but also there's at the end, what the man kills the Rottweiler by putting a drill in the dog's head, and the scene lasts for a really long time. I mean, obviously it's a puppet, but I still just don't like seeing this. I love animals. I don't like seeing them getting hurt, and even in film, I'm very uncomfortable with it. And so yeah, for me, I don't recommend this movie if you're a dog lover. I just simply can't. And otherwise, it's a pretty boring movie. I would say maybe skip this one and watch Happy Birthday to Me and Sweet 16 instead, because you're getting pretty much the same thing, essentially. Now I'm moving on to Home Sweet Home, directed by Nettie Pena, which is, from what I was looking at, the only horror movie that was directed by a woman that I've seen this year. It was produced by Dawn Edmonds, who directed Terror on Tour. And I'm real honest, it kind of shows, because this movie is some of the worst quality I've ever seen. It's right up there with Terror on Tour. I don't know what it is about these movies, but like the lighting, the film stock they used must have been really bad. I couldn't find a good restoration. It was pretty tragic. The subgenre, I would just say slasher. The tagline reads, "This year is not the turkey being carved for Thanksgiving. This year, it's not the turkey being carved for Thanksgiving. Like, I know it's set on Thanksgiving, but it really didn't need to be. It doesn't really play much into it. However, this film I did find pretty endearing. There's a character in it dressed kind of like a Kiss character, which reminded me of Terror on Tour. Ugh, in the worst way. But his name is Mistake. He's a teenager who likes to play music like Terror on Tour. Oh my god, it's coming back. He was not the final girl. I think he should have been. But this movie made me realize I really want like an retro 80s stylized slasher where the final girl is a mime, just using mime shenanigans to outsmart the killer. The killer in this case he's a bodybuilder. I think he's kind of famous. Pretty sure he's Haley Steinfeld's uncle. Bodies by Jake might be what he's called, Jake Steinfeld. He looks kind of like Discount Lou Ferrigno, and I mean that as a compliment. But yeah, the movie set up where like he takes PCP and then goes on like a murder rage. It's not a well-made movie at all, but I do think it's fun. So you're okay with a horrifically low budget and a film that is I mean, just it got ripped from a VHS for sure. That was absolutely what I was watching. The quality was atrocious. If you're okay with watching that, I totally recommend it. Moving on to Hospital Massacre, which if you're going to try and watch it, I think you're going to have an easier time finding it under the alternate title, which is X-Ray. It's directed by Boaz Davidson, starring Barbie Benton, who I'm pretty sure is a model. And then Elizabeth Hoy is in this movie too. She was in the child killer birthday movie, Bloody Birthday, from this year as well. The subgenre, I'm gonna call it Valentine's Day slasher in a hospital. Yeah. The tagline reads "Bad Medicine." So I swear Elizabeth Hoy must have had some kind of like birthday cake mandate in her contract because every film she's in, she uses a giant knife and she has a birthday cake. Honestly, if I could get a birthday cake at my job every day, I would do that too. Same girl, say. The movies, yeah, it's weird. I didn't expect it to be on Valentine's Day, and I don't know if it makes sense that it is. I know a lot of people really don't like this movie. I think the consensus is dislike amongst people. I enjoyed it. It's almost like Lynchian characters and setup. The movie's plot and characters, I mean, I got so caught up in everything else, I totally forgot there was a killer. And this woman was basically abducted by this hospital staff that like seems straight out of Twin Peaks. You just I just got really enthralled. It's almost like a perfect metaphor for trying to get through the medical system in the US. I mean, that's the real horror, am I right? It's fun. I definitely recommend it. Absolute blasts. Just don't try to like think about the plot details. They're not there. Just go for the ride, man. Just go for the ride. And then we're getting to My Bloody Valentine, directed by George Mahikla. I don't think I pronounced that right. Tagline reads, "Cross your heart and hope to die." I'm calling it subgenre Valentine's Day revenge slasher in a cave. Oh yeah, just like the Valentine's Day slasher in a hospital, we get slasher in a cave. Gotta love that. I mean, it's My Bloody Valentine. This is a very, very famous, well-known slasher film. If you haven't seen it and you're a horror fan, stop what you're doing. This is a movie you need to watch. It's really good. The remake with Jensen Ackles is not very good. I have fun with it. Yeah, it's amazing it didn't get a sequel though. I think it's a really solid film. There's some other slashers like The Prowler, directed by Joseph Zitko, who also did Friday the 13th Part 4, Final Chapter, and Invasion USA, the Chuck Norris movie. Makeup was by Tom Savini. It shows subgenre. It's another slasher. I think it's notable because the killer is wearing this like gas mask, which always gets me. I personally get confused with My Bloody Valentine. Tagline reads, "It will freeze your blood." I mean, do you ever watch an 80s horror movie and know without looking it up, Tom Savini did the effects? As far as 80s slasher goes, I think this is a really good one. Like I said, I confuse it with My Bloody Valentine's Day, but it's totally worth a watch, but it does kind of blend in. But if I'm being honest, I think I kind of prefer The Prowler to My Bloody Valentine. Like, I really, really like this movie. Definitely recommend it. All right. Then we get to Graduation Day, directed by Herb Fried, or Herb Fried, depending on if you're supposed to pronounce the H. Starring Christopher George. We have a Linnea Quigley appearance. Subgenre, I'm calling it sports revenge. The tagline reads, "The class of 81 is running out of time." It's funny because it's about track and field, so running out of time. Yuck, yuck, yuck. I said sarcastically. This film's editing is baffling. Like, it's not bad or good. It's just like wildly unique. I felt like the editor was sitting there thinking to himself, how do I make as much work for myself as possible? I do always love Linnea Quigley appearance. Is from what I understand, based on some comments, I think she made on I don't remember which volume, but one of the volumes of In Search of Darkness. She replaced another actress, and they did it in the most low budget, nonsensical way possible. Yeah, sometimes they just make sense, sometimes they don't. A lot of the actors in this movie don't look like high school students. They look like they've been longtime members of AARP, but it's fun. I really like it. Definitely enjoy it. It's unique. Dumb fun. Yes, it totally recommend. Then we get to Final Exam, directed by Jimmy Hudson, who also did My Best Friend is a Vampire. I love that movie. The subgenre is slasher with Greek, like a, what do you call it? Oh my God, Greek house. Ah! I'm just thinking of like, I can't think of it. In college. Whatever, hazing. Some people may pass the test, God help the rest. What a great tagline. I love it when they rhyme. So fun. Okay, so there's a character called Radish who he's one of those characters that's very aware and careful and a fan of horror. I feel like he walked so that Randy Meeks from Scream could nerd. I loved the character of Radish. He was not the final girl. I felt like he should have been. This movie's pretty unique in that the killer just shows up and we don't know anything about him. We never learn his name. He never speaks. He just shows up, starts killing, and then is defeated by the final girl, and that's it. I mean, spoiler, but it's not a well-made movie in terms of plot. But I really liked the characters, particularly Radish, but just in general, I do think it is weird, and I'll put a warning that there is like a fake out in the film that would not absolutely not appear in a film today. This is it kind of dates it a little bit. It's kind of shocking. It might be a little bit of an issue for some people watching it. But overall, I think the film, I really enjoy it. I think it's pretty lowly rated amongst horror fans, but I think it's a good time. I think it's a real good time. But it's one of those where it's like, if you're looking for like information, I guess a lot of people don't like because you don't have any information about the killer, but I think that's what makes it cool. That's me. Anyway, lastly, we have Hell Night, directed by Tom DeSimone, starring Linda Blair and some others, but of course, the most important person is Linda Blair. Subgenre, it's what I call disappointments room. I'll explain in a second. The tagline reads, "Screaming you're dead." So, unpopular opinion, I think Linda Blair is just not good in this. She's just so uncharismatic. What's the antithesis of charismatic? And boring. So you have these other two guys that I quite liked, Jeff and Seth, which rhymes. That's unfortunate. I think one of them should have been the survivor over her because they just had more character and better acting, if I'm being honest. And I think the story would have been better if there's like an urban legend told at the beginning about this family. It's almost recycled in Psycho Beach Party, which is weird, but I'm gonna spoil this movie, so I'm gonna say skip ahead like a full minute if you don't want a spoiler for this. So we learn about this guy like murdered his whole family because they were I'm gonna use the word deformed because or they looked outside or just like standard deviation of like typical appearance. Um and there's like an urban legend at the beginning, and we have these kids who are staying the night at the house. Fraternity, that's the word I was trying to come up with earlier. Greek houses, fraternities. So there's like a hazing situation again. So they need to stay the night in this house to get into the fraternity thing, I think. Which I guess it's a co-ed fraternity. I don't know if those exist, but whatever. And I think it would have been more interesting if or rather Seth had been a member of that family, and that it was a rumor that they were deformed, but they had just been killed, and that he was using he ends up being like insulted that his family home and tragedy is being used as a joke, but that the head of the fraternity is actually the killer. I think that would have been a lot more interesting. I don't like I think it completely and totally lacks depth, and I really just don't like the deformed dude's gonna kill because deformed. It's very ableist and gross, and I really, really hate that. Again, I talked about that when I was talking about Funhouse, but I just think you can do so much better. It's horror. You can actually have an interesting commentary. I mean, Todd Browning was saying some really great things in the freaking 30s that 50 years later, we've just completely regressed to like, if you look or seem different, then you're a killer. And part of me does blame, I guess, I don't want to blame anyone, but I'll think it, yeah. Moving on. Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. I absolutely love this effing movie. Maybe too much. It's directed by William Asher, who directed a lot of those like beach party movies, as well as quite a bit of TV. The cinematography is by Jan de Bont, who did like, little movies you may have heard of, like Die Hard, Basic Instinct, Cujo, Jewel of the Nile, Hunt for Red October, Flatliners, a bunch of others. I mean, he's Jan de Bont. He's such a talented cinematographer. I don't know if that shows in this or not. I don't necessarily remember thinking like, wow, this is some outstanding cinematography, but everyone gets to start somewhere. It's starring Jimmy McNichol, who I think was kind of a popular TV actor. Susan Tyrrell. There's a cameo from a very young Bill Paxton, but always memorable, of course. Subgenre, I'm going to call it angry incest auntie versus homophobic cop. Who's the villain? You decide. The tagline reads, "She was lonely. He was all she had. No one would take him from her and live." It's a weird title, Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, that has nothing to do with the movie. But that aside, I deeply, deeply enjoy this weird ass film. It's so strange. It's baffling. I don't know what's happening. Yeah, I like a movie that confuses me. Really, I love it. I love it so much. Absolutely recommend it. You write in. Who is the villain, the aunt or the cop? Because I really think it's the cop. The aunt was ill. We dispatched her, but the cop was the bad guy in the end. Anyway, Fear No Evil, directed and written by Frank LaLoggia, who also did Lady in White, starring Stefan Argrim, Elizabeth Hussman. You'd recognize her as the grandma in Dante's Peak. Oh dear. The thing about like talking all by myself for an hour is like my throat gets so dry. And then I feel bad about taking drink breaks. The subgenre is queer teen Lucifer in high school. What could go wrong? The tagline reads, "Alexandria High, class of 81. All the students are going to hell except Andrew. He sent them there." I've I've never seen a movie that was so boring while simultaneously being so unhinged. A lot of people are comparing it. I saw on Letterboxd reviews to The Omen, and I totally get that, but I raise you Carrie. So enter Andrew. He's a sweet, quiet, queer teen. He's also literally Satan reborn. That's not a spoiler. That's the opening of the movie. And poorly teenage Lucifer is just trying to get through the worst thing mankind has ever created, high school PE. And it is not going so well. And after a gay panic in the shower, all hell breaks loose, literally. And then I'm going to go and spoil the end. You might want to skip ahead, maybe just like 30 seconds. The film ends with an explosion of flashing rainbow glitter and lights. So make of that what you will, because I'm reading this movie definitely has very queer reading, and I don't know what that means or what was happening or why. Once again, though, I do have to talk about does the dog die? I have a hard time recommending this movie because there is a very intense scene with where the teen Lucifer kills a dog. While I was watching it, I absolutely had to pause it to go look up whether or not they really killed this dog because they clearly have the body of a dog. Like it's low budget. I know what a dog looks like. That is absolutely a dog. I was really freaked and thought they killed this dog. So I looked it up. From my understanding, they sedated the dog, but because of that, you're looking at a real dog and, he's behind the dog drinking it's fake blood. They didn't actually cut the dog. The dog is just sedated, but it's incredibly visceral and hard to watch. The scene doesn't need to be there. I think the rest of the movie is bonkers and really just wild and enjoyable. It has a great, 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 great soundtrack that cracked me up. But that dog scene really took me out of it. And I mean, for the dog scene alone, I almost don't recommend it. And I would say watch it with care. Maybe skip that scene because you don't need to see it. And it makes him irredeemable. Whereas I know he's supposed to be Lucifer, but really he wasn't the bad guy in the movie. Anyway, moving on. Like if I could remake any of these movies, that's the one I would say remake. Remake Fear No Evil. Okay, now I'm moving on. I'm sorry. Just so much to say about that one because it's wild. It's so wild. All right, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, directed by Frank De Felita. Frank De Felita. Said it with more confidence the second time. Starring Charles During, Larry Drake. You recognize him as Dr. Giggles, Lane Smith, Claude Earl Jones, like so many famous people. Subgenre, I'm going to call it Mob Justice Has Consequences. Its tagline is the original classic. It's a strong sentence. This movie, I just think this one's skippable. It's an mob of angry men kill someone innocent because bigot's gonna bigot. They killed like a man who's differently abled. And then he like comes back and starts picking them off one by one. Easy, I just found it kind of forgettable, but it has a lot of great actors in it. So like if you want to watch it for that reason, totally do. I think a lot of people like this movie. I'm not one of them. Moving on to Evil Speak, directed by Eric Weston, starring Clint Howard. Hey, Claude Earl Jones again. Subgenre is bullied kid powers up thanks to demons. I love those. And the tagline reads, "Remember the little kid you used to pick on? Well, he's big boy now." It's like this kid starts getting into some demonology on the interwebs and make some sacrifices so that he can like bully the people or get back at the people who are bullying and mistreating him. It's basically 976 Evil, and of those two movies, I'm recommending 976 Evil. Not that Evil Speak is a bad movie, but listen, I'm gonna spoil this part from go ahead. This is my version of Does the Dog Die.com. The bullies kill a puppy, and that was way too far for me. I think this movie is pretty intense. I think it might have been a video nasty. They use a lot of animals. I just don't like that the dog died. Listen, I have a line clearly, as you may have been able to tell through this whole thing, and that's puppy murder. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Don't kill puppies, damn it. Frightmare, directed by Norman Thaddeus Vane. That is a great name. Is released by Troma. I rewatched it today, and I always love when Floyd Kaufman's name comes up. You know you're in for a treat. It was starring a bunch of people, but the person I recognized was Freddie Main was the main character. I'll talk about him in a second. Subgenre, I'm calling it Don't Rob Graves, or to quote the movie, show more respect for the dead. The tagline is to the limit, which maybe I missed something, but I don't know how that pertains to the movie. It's not a great tagline. And yeah, so there's this old like monster movie star in kind of a vein of a Christopher Lee, and he fakes his death, but then he actually dies, but then maybe he doesn't, and a bunch of his fans go and rob his grave to like pay tribute to him, which I feel like in real life maybe a band did that with one of their bandmates. I don't quite remember. It's kind of a weird thing that happened, but I don't know if that happened before or after this. I should have looked it up. It only just came back to me. Well, anyway, it reminded me a lot of the film Fade to Black from last year, where it's really blending the line between the monster movies of old and the slasher craze of new, because they like rob the grave from this like guy who was in these old monster movies. He's dressed like a vampire. Like I said, it's very much like I think he looks more like Christopher Lee, but I think he's supposed to be more of a Bela Lugosi. And he ends up getting powers and kind of picking off the people one by one, kind of more like akin to a slasher. So it's really bridging the gap between these like generations of the horror genre. I love it. I think it's really good. The version I watched was pretty degraded. I'm sure there's a better restoration out there. The audio I think was very lackluster. I didn't like necessarily. They had this weird effect. I don't know what it's called, but they put like an echo on the voice, kind of like that. On a lot of it, where I don't know why they did that for a lot of the things that the main character was saying when he was talking after he'd passed, which is, I just don't know why I didn't like it. A lot of the music wasn't very good. But I do think the movie's worth watching. Just don't have like super high expectations when you go into it. Going on to Nightmare, directed by Romano Scavallini. Subgenre, I'm calling it mentally ill man killing people because he's haunted by memories of seeing his dad have sex because Freud. That's a long one. The tagline reads, "The dream you can't escape alive." You know, to quote the movie, he's out there killing people, and we can't have that. End quote. So this movie is trying. It has potential, but ultimately, to me, it comes off as very like stereotypical in a very negative ableist way, personally. So this guy is released from a psychiatric ward. I don't remember what he had done up until, I think he had already killed people at that point. But they had done an experimental treatment on him, and they're like, he's cured. His doctor really seems to care. It doesn't seem like anything nefarious or bad is happening. Like, they really believe in this guy and in like trying to cure people from these ailments that they have. He's labeled as schizophrenic. But we keep cutting back between him and what he's doing and this family. This family is comprised of the most insufferable people I have seen on film in a long time. Like this kid George. Yo. Oh, no, I'm sorry. George was the guy's name. I don't remember the kid's name. Sorry. This kid, if this was my kid, I would have lost it and killed him too. I would have had a breakdown as well. He was the worst. And I ultimately feel bad for the killer, because I mean there's this scene where it's like he comes off as so pitiable and so tragic. It like I said, the movie's really trying, but it's ultimately you end up feeling bad for the killer and wanting him to kill. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it, so skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want to know. his own family. He's going to kill his family. And it's like, his family's the worst though. So I'm like, yeah, dude, get it. I'm with you, man. Which that shouldn't be the case because just the film wants you to be rooting for them and not him. I also feel bad for a psychiatrist. I don't know. It was a weird movie. Moving on to Night of the Horrors. Okay. So it's directed by Tony Malinowski. It's a ghost story, I guess. Maybe? Question mark. They don't have a tagline. They have a tag paragraph, so strap in. When 4 people are stranded on what was once an ancient battlefield, one of them is haunted by the voice from the past. As she tries to answer their call for help, a chilling nightmare unfolds. Thus begins the night of horror. So this might be one of the worst quality, like in terms of audiovisual movies that I've ever seen. It was worse than Home Sweet Home and Terror on Tour. It's impressively bad. It's like looking at an expired Polaroid photo of an old Polaroid photo in movie form. And it's not just that. It's also like the framing of things and is not well done. Lighting is not well done. You have people like sitting at a bar and their backs are to the camera instead of doing it like a oneer, like, not a oneer, I'm sorry. Oh, it's getting late. Instead of like being in frame, like putting the person's face in frame and then switching back and forth or pulling back the camera to have 2 people on a table sitting across from each other. So we're looking at their like side profiles. They're like sitting and we're watching them having a conversations with their backs to the camera. And it's clearly just probably in someone's garage made dressed up to look like a bar. It's so bad. It's so bad. And most of the film is if you're familiar with like gothic novellas and novels, a lot of times the framing device will be someone is like writing a letter or telling a story about someone else telling them a story. I don't know why that is, but that is the framing device used here. I think it was really smart that we moved away from that because it's too many layers and it's unnecessary. I don't understand why that was a thing, but it's something that's done in like Frankenstein, Turn of the Screw, a little bit in Dracula. Yeah, it's good we moved away. It's unnecessary characters and yeah, dumb. This movie was really trying to be a movie, and I do respect that. But the movie that it was trying to be was Legend of the Boggy Creek, and I don't understand that. It's a choice. But the weirdest thing is that they have like a Confederate ghost, and I'm just gonna go ahead and say I don't understand the push for Confederate ghosts and vampires we're supposed to empathize with. Like, you could easily just have that character be a Yankee, and that would just as equally tip off the audience to the time period they're from. Stop trying to make us empathize with the racists. You're on the wrong side. But anyway, towards the end, I'm just going to go ahead and spoil. This is a terrible movie. I don't recommend it. But towards the end, they have, and I'm not kidding, I timed it. It is an 8.5-minute footage of a Civil War reenactment with this like Gordon Lightfoot-esque music playing over it. It's so wild. It's so on drugs. It's 8.5 minutes. This movie's insane. It's so bafflingly bad. I love it. I'd watch it again. 100%. It is a ridiculous movie. It's not well made, but it's a weird time. If I can watch a movie and spend the whole time going, but why would you do it like that? I'm entertained, man. I am. So moving on to an actually really good movie, Dead and Buried, directed by Gary Sherman, who unfortunately did Poltergeist 3. I know Dan O'Bannon is listed as a writer, but from my understanding, what he contributed to the script wasn't utilized. Starring, you'll definitely recognize one Robert Englund, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people you'll recognize. For instance, there's this like I almost called him mortuary guy, a mortician in the movie. He's Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka. Subgenre, I'm calling it Mad Scientist Makes a Zombie Town. The tagline reads, "It will take your breath away. All of it." I mean, it's kind of like a Twilight Zone episode. It is really good. I think it's better the second time you watch it once you know what the ending is, like the reveal. There's a lot of the effects are really good. I think Stan Winston did the effects, if I remember correctly. And they're great. And the movies definitely has a lot of really, really memorable scenes that happen. I think famously I'm just gonna call it the needle scene. If you know, you know, and if you don't and you want to watch it, you will. It's probably the most famous scene from the movie. It's got a beautiful poster, and this is one of the rare times where I'm like, the poster doesn't have anything to do with the movie. But it's a good poster for a good movie, and that almost never happens. Totally recommend this movie. It's really great, very underloved. Then we get to Road Games, directed by Richard Franklin, who did Psycho 2, Cloak and Dagger, some other stuff. It's starring Stacey. Let me try that one more time. Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis. The tagline reads, "On the world's longest highway, it's not a game, it's murder!" Exclamation point. The subgenre, I mean, it's basically Rear Window, but in Australia. It's a very Australian film. It's so Stacey Keach plays a trucker, and Jamie Lee Curtis is hitchhiker. Stacey Keach's character thinks he sees or observes someone who is a murderer, and wildness ensues. It's an oddly methodical and boring movie. I know a lot of people consider it a very boring movie, but it's like totally watchable because Stacey Keach is so entertaining. He's absolutely delivering a performance because he's such a phenomenal actor. The plot and like it's the script that's not fantastic, but it's definitely worth a watch. Sadly, my tea has gone cold. Oh dear. All right, The Boogans, directed by James L. Conway, subgenre men versus nature in a cave. The tagline reads, "Some things shouldn't be disturbed." So the dwarves have dug too deep into the mines of Moria and unleashed the ancient evils known as Belra. Oh wait, sorry, that's the wrong story. Same plot though, basically. I'm gonna say the acting sold me on a bad puppet, which I love. I love it when I'm watching a movie and it's not great, but the acting and the fear that the characters are putting on screen really sells me on something that I probably otherwise would think is pretty ridiculous. Like they're really, really doing a good job. Um, the script is pretty good. The movie's fine. I definitely recommend it. I think it's fun. I just have one major thing. Remember that line I have about dogs? Girl. I couldn't get behind any of these characters. So there's a group of people staying in a house and they have this dog, Tiger. They're so mean to Tiger. Like every time they talk about this dog, they're just like shitting on the dog, not literally, but they're so mean to this dog. They clearly don't like the dog. They have so much contempt and anger towards this dog. It's like, just find the dog a new home. Like if you don't like your dog, rehome your dog. If you don't want to have a dog, find him a new home with people who will love him. Because I guarantee you, if you don't love your dog, somebody else will. Because they're a dog and they deserve to be loved. And you're a garbage person. Sorry. I have a line. Tiger deserves better. And I ultimately really like the idea that people have dug too deep into the mines and there's some creatures that live there and you're kind of, trifling with their home. It is very much like what Tolkien wrote with the Balrogs and the dwarves. I think that's really good story, personally. I really like it. The movie's not fantastic, but I think it really works, I don't think it's very popular. I think a lot of that has to do with the monster is kind of silly looking. Clearly, they only had one, but you're supposed to infer that there are multiple. Um, it's such a bad puppet, guys. It's such a bad puppet. But yeah, really enjoy it. Would recommend the Boogans. The Pit. I did not recommend The Pit. It's directed by Lou Lehman. Subgenre, I called it Annoying Child Turned Evil by Monsters. The tagline reads, Jamie wouldn't kill anyone unless Teddy told him to. The poster and the tagline kind of make it seem like the kid's teddy bear is evil. It's not, but it would have been cooler if it was. This kid is completely insufferable. I don't think I've ever seen a worse child on film. The plot is boring. It's just dumb. And the kid, he's kind of like a predecessor to the kid. I don't want to spoil it. Skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want a spoiler. He's kind of like the kid from Better Watch Out, but if he had a monster. Hard pass for me. Moving into foreign horror. Quite a few movies here and then finishing out. Okay, so Mystics in Bali. So obviously this is an Indonesian film directed by H. Taja Dahali. Tagline reads, she sold her soul to possess the secrets of black magic. That tagline is not what happened. So this woman is in Indonesia to do research on a witch or magic or something. And the witch lets her be her apprentice. That's a red flag. White girl, you just walked into this town. It's like, hey, witch, can I be your apprentice? And she's like, hell yeah. Red flag, girl. Red flag. You just walked yourself into the oven and let the witch cook you, girl. And by let her become her apprentice, I mean she becomes a disembodied floating head with its organs / vampire thingy. And there's this. I'm gonna spoil this. Skip ahead 30 seconds. There's a scene where the disembodied vampire head and organs floats through a window to this pregnant woman and sucks out this pregnant woman's baby through her vagina like a straw. It's fucking insane. It's absolutely insane. This movie definitely recommend. It's wild and fun, and you don't see a lot of Indonesian 80s horror movies, so try something new. Maybe you'll like it. The next film I have is Kung Fu Zombie, directed by Ha Shan. Subgenre 80s Hong Kong horror. It's kind of the earliest zombie horror comedy that I've seen. Tagline reads, how do you kill something that's already dead? This movie's freaking hilarious. The choreography is great. I really love the fighting scenes. The plot's hilarious. The characters are hilarious. This movie completely and totally works. It's more of a comedy than a horror. It doesn't have the balance that American Werewolf in London does, but it's super funny. Absolutely recommend. It is a blast. Moving on to Night of the Werewolf, directed and written by Paul Naschy, who also did Howl of the Devil, which is really freaking hard to find. Starring Paul Naschy and a bunch of other people. Subgenre, I'm calling it sexy vampire ladies versus hot hairy werewolf men. Who doesn't love it? The tagline reads, it used to only be a myth. This movie really is about sexy vampires entering rooms in a moody and atmospheric way. It's a Spanish film. I like Paul Naschy. He plays a werewolf. He plays a werewolf quite a few films, and he's a very hairy man, gorgeous head of hair, beautiful beard, but he's kind of indistinguishable. That's a hard word to say. He's kind of indistinguishable from his Wolfman counterpart. But I like that he's a werewolf and he's like fighting vampires. It almost feels like Dark Shadows in a way. I really like this movie. Definitely recommend. It's a very, very, very fun watch. And I really like Paul Naschy films. Whether he's acting or directing, I think he's very entertaining. We're going to The Last Shark. It's Italian Jaws. That's what it is. It's directed by Enzo G. Castorelli, starring Vic Morrow. In one of his, obviously it's 81, so we're getting to one of his last roles. The Tagline reads, "You're what's for dinner." I mean, you've seen Jaws. Watch the discount version, but with a better working shark, which is funny. I know some people say that the Jaws really benefits from not seeing the shark that often, but you know what? I've watched a lot of shark movies, and let me tell you, I don't I can't name a single shark movie. Even stuff like Sharks of the Corn or Ouija Shark, Shark Exorcist, where I'm like, you know what would have made this movie better if we saw less shark? I think that's just some BS thing. We don't know that the movie is better because we don't see the shark as much, because we didn't see the version where we have seen the shark as much. But I've seen a lot of shark movies where we see the shark a lot, and that doesn't take away from the movie. I'm just throwing that out there. Jaws is one of my favorite movies. It's a spectacular film, one of the greatest movies ever made, but I just think it's a silly thing to say. The Last Shark, it's fine. I like it. I love a shark movie though. But it's Italian Jaws. So if that interests you, watch it. If it doesn't, I get it. I like it. Okay. Ooh. Cannibal Feroe, directed by Umberto Luzzini, who did Ghost House, Nightmare Beach, He's in a lot of movies. And subgenre racist Italian cannibal movie. It's a video nasty, guys, and it definitely deserves to be. Tagline reads, I don't want to read the tagline. I'm gonna say they assaulted and murdered his sister while he watched helplessly. Now it's his turn to make them die slowly. They use a different word, but I just don't feel comfortable using that word, so I subbed it with assault. Yeah, just because you acknowledge the issue doesn't alleviate you from the responsibility of still showing it. This movie does at least try to fault the kind of racist colonizers, so there is that. I didn't catch anyone's name, but this one guy was awful and he totally deserved to die. And I was really happy when he did. And I'm glad the one woman survived. She was there to study this tribe of people, and she does end up getting her doctorate's degree. And you know what? Maybe the tagline should have read, what some people will do for their thesis, This movie is very graphic. I personally don't like the white people go into the woods and get killed and eaten by darker skinned people, because it is inherently racist, and I don't like that trope. And it is so gratuitous. There are a lot of Italian films like this. I don't think it started with Cannibal Holocaust, but there are movies like that, and I just simply don't like them. Not my cup of tea. If you like them, it's not a condemnation of your taste at all. That's just not for me. All right, then there are three Lucio Fulci films. So I'll start with The Beyond. Tagline: beyond death, beyond evil, beyond the dirty gates of hell. This is the one about the blind girl who, spoiler, go ahead and skip like 15 seconds. She's killed by her own German Shepherd, so I don't like that. That's my line, remember? It's a lot of weird ethereal flashbacks, a lot of like visually impaired people with wearing really pretty contacts, actually, with like the family that goes into the basement from hell. Which is odd, because then we get to House by the Cemetery. Tagline reads, "Read the fine print. You may have just mortgaged your life." Oh, effing Bob, the child. Bob. He's also in Manhattan Baby, A Blade in the Dark, and Demons. I hate Bob. He's not quite as terrible as the kid from The Pit, but he's worse than the kid from the Babadook for me. I just can't stand Bob. I really can't even tell you anything about the movie because I was just so seething every time this little freaking kid was on the screen. I'm gonna have to rewatch the movie. I really couldn't tell you anything about House by the Cemetery. And then we get The Black Cat, which is my favorite of these. Subgenre Evil Kitty. Tagline reads, "When you hear this cat breathing down your neck, start praying. Before you finish your amen, you're dead." This movie is about a killer black cat. Has no right to be this good. The cinematography is by Sergio Salvetti, and it's stellar. Like, I didn't know Murder Cat POV would be this entertaining. It's a fun movie. I I like it so much more than I should. It's ridiculous. Okay, so that concludes my recap of all of the 1981 films I've seen. Uh, Hopefully more will become available because I still have a lot on my to watch list. There's like still 8 movies that I wasn't able to see, unfortunately. So fingers crossed that those become available someday, somehow, somewhere. Do you have any recommendations or I missed anything? Please, please, please comment below. Always looking for Rex. Always looking for Rex. And yeah, have a great day. Thank you so much for listening. Don't know why you did. And stay with the rainbows.